It would be remiss of me to have somebody on our show from the UK government and not ask what is UK government doing to actually go after some of the threat actors.
We're working on broadly two things. One is to bring down the threat to the UK. Now that is a rising tide globally. One of the things we're doing is working with international allies on the counter-ransomware initiative.
Are we going more carrot or are we going more stick to encourage change?
We're bringing you the hard-hitting stories when it comes to global security, tech and resilience.
In partnership with Cyber News Group. Hello and welcome to this episode in partnership with Cyber News Group. I'm Lisa Forte.
And I'm Sarah Armstrong-Smith. We're bringing you the hard-hitting stories when it comes to global security, tech and resilience.
And today we are joined by Felicity Oswald, who's the Chief Operating Officer for the National Cyber Security Centre here in the UK. Welcome, Felicity.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
So can you give us a really quick overview for our listeners and viewers on what the NCSC does and your role within it?
Sure. So as you said, I am the Chief Operating Officer at the National Cyber Security Centre. We were stood up in 2016 and we're part of GCHQ, the Intelligence, Cyber and Security Agency. GCHQ is one of the three intelligence agencies of the UK. We're the ones who do the kind of signals intelligence. And NCSC is the part of that organisation that is there to give cyber advice and cyber support to everyone in the UK. Our mission statement is to make the UK the safest place to live and work online. So I have to worry about the cyber resilience of the top end of government, CNI and defence, looking after the top secret systems that we rely on so much. But also our organisation worries about everyone, down to small businesses, charities and families.
And that sort of really brings us into our discussion, I think, today, because one of the things we've seen at the time of recording, it's still ongoing, I'd say. We've had a few key attacks on our retail sector. And this, I think, has shown the British public the level of disruption cyber attacks can cause. And I suppose also how upsetting that is when it disrupts our sort of grocery supplies and things like that. And so one of the things that I started to get a bit more interested in is within the UK, we think about critical national infrastructure and we think about telecoms, we think about power supply, water supply, things like that, perhaps police, hospitals, those sorts of organisations. But what about farms and our fisheries and the people and that sort of agricultural supply chain that puts food on our table? Because over the years, lots of people have done research into this. It's become increasingly reliant on IoT. And that's obviously got great efficiency savings for these organisations, but as a result, they've lost perhaps the ability to do things in a manual way if they were attacked. So I kind of want to get your view on the state of play of the UK in that respect and what the disruption could look like to our farms, for example.
It's such a great question, Lisa, and I think one that everyone should be talking about up and down the UK. The recent retail attacks, whilst I don't think we need to go into the individual specific incidents, but they're an example of how cyber cuts through into real people's lives, real families, real shops, real lived experience impacted. We had the same a couple of years ago with the NHS attack in London. Mm-hmm. There are still repercussions of that today. Cyber is really serious. I think one of the things we have is a bit of a language problem in the cybersecurity industry. Cyber makes it sound techie and quite distant from the average person. And I think we all need to be fixing that. In terms of how is the state of cyber in the UK, frankly, it's nowhere near where it needs to be. We know that lots of organisations, big and small, worry about cyber, but many fewer act on it. So we have lots of ways through the NCSC to improve that. But I think we do need to firstly have a conversation about what cyber means to all organisations, big and small. Farming's a great industry. As an example. So we know that tractors are increasingly, GPS enabled. They have huge amount of technology is just woven into every moment of a farmer's life or of a farm's life. We did some work a few years ago with the National Farmers Union, the NFU, to give cyber advice to farmers, because it's not something most of them think about day in, day out. But actually, we need to be thinking about everyone and how they use technology. If you use technology in your business, whether it's to send emails, to manage stock, to run supply chains, to open doors, then you need to worry about cyber.
I just wanted to touch on that a little bit, Felicity, as we were talking about critical national infrastructure. Do we need to completely rethink what we term as critical? Because it sounds like every single industry of every single size is a target at the moment. So do we just need to reframe even what we're talking about in terms of what we deem critical from a UK or international perspective?
I think it's a really fair challenge. The CNI sectors in the UK, of which I think there's 14 at latest count, but apologies if I've got that wrong. The Secretary of State just added a new one last year. The sectors are absolutely determined, were defined 10 or 15 years ago. But I still think they're worth thinking about, because those are the sectors that the lifestyle of the average family in the UK depends on, the average business in the UK depends on. They're still the right sectors. But just like crime or financial risk, every organisation needs to think about their cybersecurity. You don't just have to worry about it if you're in a CNI sector. The other thing we need to do as government, and we are doing, is thinking about how cyber plays out differently in each of those sectors. So we have a finite number of energy companies or water companies in the UK, but they have a huge supply chain. Whereas in food, we might have a finite number of supermarkets, but actually the food industry writ large is much broader. It relies on smaller industries, on agriculture, on fisheries, etc. So those are the things we absolutely need to think about, but it does play out so differently in each of those sectors. So later on this year, the government will introduce the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill. That will look at how we deal with this in each sector, but it's crucial that we work with the regulators as well.
Because I think with resilience, just to sort of play this out, if you take, for example, a dairy farm, right, and you've got a small dairy farm or several small dairy farms, all of which were targeted at the same time, because I'm presuming they're probably using, a similar sort of technology for them. They have no ability to, say, milk the cows manually or produce that dairy product manually because of the IoT that they've set up. If you then take that disruption forward, so you then are not producing the dairy products, they don't go to the supermarkets, they don't go to the restaurants, they don't go to those. So then all of those industries now have disruption as well. And I think that's almost where we've got to start rethinking, because disruption in this place causes disruption in a ripple effect outwards. And those organisations don't need to have a cyber attack, but now they've got no dairy products coming in, so they have this problem, and so on and so forth.
It's almost like we have to think about things systemically. So I think historically we've looked at cyber attacks on individual institutions. And I think exactly you were saying, Felicity, is we look at that supply chain attack, we see the ripple effect across multiple industries simultaneously. It probably wasn't a surprise they did it right over bank holiday weekend, when everyone is looking forward to enjoying the sunny weather and getting all their food and barbecues and everything else. So it just propels itself into the mind of the public with regards to some of these things and what we're doing. And do you think that's the game plan ultimately of the threat actors in terms of how they're evolving? So it used to be we target the organisation, maybe we take some organisational data, but more and more we're seeing the type of data and the type of impact is actually personal data. Or it's, as we say, it's deliberately trying to disrupt a lot of that infrastructure at the local level so that the people themselves almost turn them against the government and some of those different industries. You see that kind of change from the type of industry that you look at?
So we're definitely seeing the threat evolve. Now, there are all sorts of organisations and individuals who want to do harm to the UK for different reasons. That absolutely is criminal actors. And we work really closely with the National Crime Agency and other parts of law enforcement to investigate those and support law enforcement action. But there's all sorts of other people as well. So I think we have to remember when we're thinking about cyber that it's not just criminals trying to do criminality, though that is the most we see in the UK, the most chronic in the UK. We also do have to worry about others that just want to cause havoc, whether nation states or individual hacktivists, etc. So I do think the threat is evolving. The other thing we see, though, is actually the scale of cyber is way bigger than any of the newspaper headlines suggest. So almost half of businesses in the UK had a cyber incident last year. a third of charities. That's enormous in terms of, and we get, 5 or 10 make the press every year and really capture journalists' imagination. So it's everywhere. And they're doing it for all sorts of reasons. The ones we tend to notice tend to be companies that are, maybe dear to our hearts or that we all spend time with or spend our money with, or organisations that are absolutely critical in supply chains where there is that ripple effect. But actually it's everywhere. It's all over the place. So that's one of the challenges is it's happening everywhere, but we only hear occasional stories. So how do we spark action?
I think that also causes another problem, which is I think when people think about cyber, and this is basically what you were just saying, you immediately go to banking, don't you, and finance. And, finance and financial services industries, they have dealt with the issue of disruption, bank runs, liquidity ratios, DORA coming in the EU, etc., etc. They've looked at this a lot. And financial disruption, I would say, is fairly well understood. But I think what that's ended up doing is that the financial houses have a budget that allows them to offer 6-figure salaries to people relatively new to the industry, actually, can earn amazing amounts of money in those financial houses. And then conversely, you've got, NHS, police even, who have no ability to go anywhere near those numbers. And then you go into the third sector, as you were saying. I know the NCSE has got a charities guide and stuff that was really great. But again, the third sector has even less money to spend on this stuff. So you get what I think has been termed cyber inequality within one country almost, because you've got a lot of capability over here, basically going to nothing in this other area that has still a lot of potential to cause harm. I just wondered kind of what your view on that was. And really, I suppose, what do we do about that? Because there's no more money. So,
I mean, you're absolutely right. And I agree with the picture you've described. We do see salaries all over the place, not being able to attract the talent needed. But overall in the UK, we don't have the talent we need. So firstly, one of the first things we have to do is start to address the skills that we've got. We need to upskill everyone in cybersecurity. We need more qualified experts, but we also need the average executive or middle manager in an organisation to understand cyber. I'm sure we can come back to that in a little bit. I think we also need to recognise that it's not just about money. We need to make sure that cyber is something that's seen in an organisation as being valued. You would never pay a finance director pittance in a public sector organisation or in a charity. You would pay them commensurate with their skills. Yes, it may never be the same as a finance director in a huge investment bank, but it still recognises their skills. I would want to see something in cyber that's the same, a recognition of the skills that can be brought. And I do think that if organisations are clear on their mission, they can get great people in. The final thing I think we need to do is make sure that we are ensuring that those with the broadest shoulders can actually carry the biggest load. And that has to be in terms of companies selling individual technology offers or integration platforms, or those who do have the ability to contribute, whether it's pro bono work or reduced rates for some, or we need an ecosystem that supports organisations big and small. One of the things that we're really proud of in NCSC is that a couple of years ago, the UK changed our legislation for domestic consumer products to ensure that they're safe from a cybersecurity perspective. So you should no longer be able to put an IoT device out without the ability as the consumer to change that password, for example. That was groundbreaking regulation, the first in the world. We're really proud of that. We work really closely with government lawmakers on that one. So I do think there are the abilities to inch forward and ensure that the products sold to any organisation are safer, but we've all got so much work to do.
So we talk a lot about boards. We talk about the level of accountability at that level in terms of investment, resources and everything else. I think that is known because we've just talked about how widely it's discussed in the media. It has an impact across every single person. So irrespective of who they are, what industry they're in, they see this big picture. I feel like we're in a stalemate situation because I don't think anyone can deny that cybersecurity is a major, major issue. However, it has been a major, major issue for a very, very long time. And as much as we talk about new regulation, we talk about what manufacturers of products should be doing, we talk about secure by design, secure by default, we've talked about skilling. Whatever we're doing, as an industry as a whole, it isn't actually working. So what do we have to actually do to change mindsets? And where's the level of accountability come from? We've talked about, is it boards, or do you think it's wider than that? Where do we think that we actually have to start disrupting things?
So I'm happy with a bit of controversy. So one of the really shocking facts is that boards in the UK, 70% of boards think that cyber is a serious matter. That is a stat that's been around for a number of months, probably post the last kind of round of incidents that have been in the press. I would imagine that number's gone up a little bit. Only 30% have someone on their board who is a technology and cyber person. That's an enormous difference. So we've got 70% of boards agreeing it's a problem, but only 30% who are acting on it by bringing in the expertise to the boardroom. I think all too often you meet boards and you speak to a chief executive and you say to them, how's your cyber? And they say, my cyber guy's on it. Because it's always a guy, frankly, always. My cyber guy's on it. I
feel like I need to apologise to our audience a little bit there.
Well, I think there is something about, and they rarely use the name of the individual. Yes. And you say, okay, do you know your CISO? Do they have a seat on the board? No. Well, who do they report to? And then it becomes clear it's 1 or 2 or 3 steps removed from board level. So there's something about they want it to be solved, but they don't want it in the boardroom too often. Mm-hmm. I think if it was any other type of serious risk that could undermine your business overnight, that person would have a boardroom table, or the person would be invited in regularly, or there'd be a 6-monthly exercise. So there's something about how do we change the conversation at boards to make cyber risk more like financial risk. So you'd never say to a CEO or a chair, how's your finances? And they say, oh, I don't know, but the finance person's on it. I think we need to have cyber as the same conversation. We as the cyber community, though, have to be able to take our part in that. We have to be able to speak in plain English, make ourselves understood, take away the magic from it all a little bit as well. So there is work to do on both sides.
I think that I've got 2 points. One is more controversial than the other. So I'll start with the more controversial one and then we'll taper off to the sort of nicer, warm and fluffy one. I think the interesting point that I'm seeing a lot, an increasing amount, is that the cyber risk is being communicated, I think, adequately. I think, as you said, it's not a lack of awareness. That's where we were a few years ago. I think we're fully, the boards are fully aware this is a problem. I actually think part of the problem is they see it as, okay, what we'll do, because you're telling me it's when, not if, well, we'll put a pot of money aside. And so when it happens, that's the pot of money that pays to get us out of it. And instead of being, like you said, bringing someone in, proactively managing, thinking about it, moving it forward in a positive, proactive way, what we're actually doing is sort of going, this is our little pot for the rainy day when it happens, and then we won't deal with it, which doesn't make us more secure, it doesn't help the disruption, but is their way of managing risk without actually having to make any sort of big changes. The second part, which is warm and fluffy, I promise. You talked about there is an issue, isn't there, in the UK? We can't pretend that there's not, on female representation within the industry. It just is. Statistics show us you walk into a conference, it's there in front of you. It's not hidden. Cyber First programme has been a fantastic programme. Do you think that programme and whatever iterations may come next from it has an opportunity to address some of these issues from the cyber inequality, from the board issues and the awareness issues? Do you think that could be a good platform almost to start changing this from a grassroots perspective?
Oh, okay. 2 massive things there. Let's come back to female representation. And I appreciate my quip maybe wasn't constructive, but it was more a sense of it's often the cyber guy rather than the person having a name, the person having the professional respect that any other professional leadership would have in an organisation. I do think it's changing. And I think I agree with you that some do decide to have a pot of money to buy the insurance, to work out how to transfer the risk. Now, that isn't a bad thing to do, but you always have to insure your car, but you still need to make sure the tyres are pumped up. You've put, it's got oil. You've put petrol in it. All of those other things you do to look after a car. Make sure your wiper blades are still working well. Those are the things, the basic cyber hygiene. You need to do both. You need to absolutely think about risk transference, but also you need to build your resilience. You need to think about backups. You need to think about having cyber essentials. Have you got multi-factor authentication? These are really basic questions. Actually, most organizations, big or small, need to be having those conversations and quickly moving on to the next level of sophistication. In terms of the cyber community, now we are improving as a community, but we still have a long way to go. There are two reasons we need to improve the diversity in the cyber community. One is because we're short on skills. If we are not attracting individuals, women, individuals from other minority groups, then we're not tapping into the best talent that we can as a community. We're going to limit skills. So we need it to be an attractive profession for lots of people with all sorts of different backgrounds to join. The other thing is we have the ability then to bring what in GCHQ and NCSC we tend to call a mix of minds. So right back to our history in Bletchley, we know that having a mixed team gives you better results. We've proven that. Organisations have proven that the world over. So having mixed teams can deliver so much more. So one of the things we're doing, as you say, Lisa, and thank you for your work with us on the Cyber First scheme. So those who don't know, NCSC runs Cyber First, which is ultimately a bursary scheme to support people who want to come into professions in cyber. And they can study any subject they like at university, have access to the bursary, and then they get the opportunity to learn cyber skills along the way. So you could be a history graduate doing an undergraduate degree in history and still join Cyber First. The other thing we do under that programme, though, is we work with girls who are 12 or 13 to encourage them to think about careers in cyber. We run an annual nationwide competition called Cyber First Girls. We're up to 85,000 girls since 2017, so it's huge reach. We've got new schools and new teams joining every year, which we're really proud about. And the reason we do it at 12 or 13-year-olds is because at 14 in the UK, you choose your high school subjects for GCSE. And that's so important because if, I don't know about you guys, but when I was at school aged 12, 13, the computer lab was a no-go for me. Yeah. It wasn't welcoming for young women. We're changing that. That has changed in high schools, thank goodness. But we've got a long way to go to make sure that cyber looks like an interesting career. There are amazing young women in the sector who have joined recently through the Cyber First schemes, and young men as well. All are welcome, but we're really proud of what we do. And thank you, everyone who's involved in supporting that, including you.
I'm very envious of the kids these days because my schooling did not look anything like that. And when I've been involved and I've seen the things they get to do, I just think it was
so we're going to have to move through to solution mode,
yes.
But before I do, it would be remiss of me to have somebody on our show from the UK government and not ask what is UK government doing to actually go after some of the threat actors. So I think we've spoken a lot about how industry can upskill, how we should have a duty of care as a level of accountability through organisations. And I think it's absolutely brilliant that we're kind of thinking about how do we turn this into a career. But I think then if I kind of look more broadly to say if I'm under attack, and this is costing me money, my business is being severely disrupted, and I've got to have insurance, I've got to have all of these, got to have a little pot of money set aside. What are you doing to help me to overcome the threat actors? Or, from a law enforcement UK government perspective, what is the kind of the big ticket things that you're looking at?
Yeah, fair question, Sarah, completely. So in terms of our approach generally, we're working on broadly two things. One is to bring down the threat to the UK. Now, that is a rising tide globally that we need to make sure that we are working against. So we work with all sorts of partners around the UK, law enforcement, as I mentioned before, other parts of government, etc., to bring all of the tools the UK government has to bear against those cyber actors. So whether that's sanctions, whether that's law enforcement takedowns of sites that are proliferating some of these approaches that cyber criminals use, whether it's arrests by the NCA or other law enforcement. And we do that behind the scenes. We bring those tools and techniques together, often with our Five Eyes partners and beyond. And we ensure that we are using everything we can to bear down on the threat. Is there more to do? Of course, every day. Yeah. One of the things we're doing is working with international allies on the counter-ransomware initiative to ensure that we're bringing all of the tools that all of those many partners globally can do. The other thing we're doing is we have to make it as easy as possible for for individuals and organisations to be cyber secure. So we need to make it possible to navigate what tools to buy, what is the best type of password to set, what does multi-factor authentication actually mean? And we need to make that as smooth and seamless as possible. Because unfortunately, some people find it hard to navigate our world. And as I said earlier, I think some of that is on us as cyber professionals too.
Can I ask then, because this just gave me another controversial idea. So do you see encouraging change within the UK, obviously from a cyber perspective, as more of a carrot or a stick? Because typically, when, for example, GDPR came out, everyone was like, wow, you're going to lose 4% of global turnover if you lose a single line of data, etc. It was very stick, wasn't it? It was very kind of, you're going to be punished if you do this. That obviously hasn't been the stance of the ICO for a variety of reasons. I don't think we've seen a 4% fine yet. I could be mistaken. But they've seemed to take a very measured approach to how they handle reported breaches. So I guess, my question is, are we going more carrot or are we going more stick to encourage change?
Oh, my answer is going to be so predictable, right? It has to be both. I'm sorry. It does absolutely has to be both. We've had a lot of carrots over the last decade or two. Some colleagues might agree with me, but we haven't had much UK deliberate legislation, with the exception probably of the ICO's work. Now, that is changing with the new Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, but it's going to have a narrow focus and be really targeted against the latest threat. Mm-hmm. But it has to have a sweep of carrots as well. We have to make it easy for people to do the right thing in cybersecurity. We have to make it the right thing financially to do. Yeah. And we have to make sure that people can understand how to navigate it. Unfortunately, though, to date, there hasn't been enough action and the threat has risen faster than the action has. So that's why we do think a different approach is needed, or one further step is needed in terms of legislation.
A question I ask all of our guests, and it is kind of put you on the spot a little bit, but I have to say, Felicity, there's one thing that you would say from everything that we've discussed that you would say is the best approach that we can take right now from a cyber perspective. What would it be?
I'm going to do a shameless plug, and I know you hate them on this series, but I'm going to do it anyway. My shameless plug is for Cyber Essentials or Cyber Essentials Plus. So those are NCSC approved and agreed ways to improve your cybersecurity. Organisations need to go step by step through to understand what are their critical assets and how do they protect them. And that's the guide to do it. We know that organisations that have cyber essentials are something like 92% less likely to suffer a cyber incident. That's enormous.
So how do very small charities, for example, or farms, as we've been talking about, how do they find out about access and then start working towards those schemes if they don't have anybody who would be in the cyber sort of job category?
So Cyber Essentials is designed for medium-sized businesses, a kind of 5 or 10 people up. If you're a one-man band or very, very small, there is still really basic cybersecurity advice on our website. It runs sector by sector. So like I said earlier, for farms, we have a whole set of guidance for farmers. It is really easy to read. It's sort of 8 or 10 pages. We've got them for all sorts of different sectors. I know charity CEOs that are using our guidance every day to drive up their own cybersecurity. So it does apply to everyone. So the NCSC website, ncsc.gov.uk.
So I think that's a great area to land on, to end with. So I could just sum that up is, in essence, we need across the entirety of the UK, which is no mean feat, a minimum level of capability, a baseline, and a minimum level of skilling. Is that what you say where we need to be?
Yes, and an interest. We need people to be interested and curious about learning more in cyber.
And we'll try and link to some of that guidance in the description of the show for people to download.
Well, Felicity, it's been fascinating. Thank you for being in our hot seat today.
Thank you so much.